Today on The Dead Life, we'll hear from author Laura Carney, whose book My Father's List, How Living My Dad's Dreams Set Me Free, should inspire us all. On the cusp of middle age, a newlywed journalist discovers and finishes the bucket list of her late free-spirited father. 54 adventures in 6 years. That's what 38-year-old journalist Laura Carney embarked on when she discovered her late father Mick's bucket list. My Father's List is available June 13th, which will be today. You can follow me on Instagram at Medium Allison. You can find me on my Facebook fan page, and you can binge on my YouTube videos where you can watch episodes of The Dead Life, catch Laura live and in person on my YouTube channel. If you have a question for me or a paranormal story to share, call me and leave me a message at 802-DEAD-811. If you have abilities and are looking for your people and to strengthen your abilities, go to deaduniversity.com for more information. Well, Laura, welcome to my show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
When I got the press request, I was so fascinated by your story, and I get people writing in saying, I want to come on your show. You know, I'm a psychic, I'm a medium. I'm like, yeah, so am I, like my listeners know what that is. But your story I love because it's so compelling. And you lost your father when you were 25. That's pretty young.
Yeah. I listened to one of your episodes where you were talking about how it hits a little different when you're that young.
Yeah.
And I was curious what you meant by that. How does it stick with you in a different way?
Yes, because there's more trauma when you're young. It means you have a parent that was ripped from you at a young age rather than them dying at 90 in their sleep, or, you know, eventually we're all going to get something that takes us out, but you know, you're older, so an octogenarian, or, you know, you're much older, so it's not as big of a surprise. But when you're 25, as you were, and your dad died in a car accident, that carries more trauma because it was unexpected.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. My journey with checking off his bucket list has brought me in touch with a lot of his friends. Some of them I've yet to meet, but I heard about all the time. And one of them told me that when he was in college, he had a premonition that he would die young.
Wow. And some people do. I hear that. Or a person has a baby and they feel this fear and dread that the child's not going to live a full life, and then it ends up coming to pass. So intuition is a real thing, and premonitions are as well. So how did writing your book help you to find your way back to your father?
I think, you know, I couldn't have done the book if I weren't also doing the list, because
Right.
one of the list items was write and have a few novels published, which meant I couldn't back out. You know, that was
Right.
important, because in the past I had been trying to write a book about him for over a decade, and I would always just chicken out. So I think it was more in the years leading up to the moment when we found the list. I was training to become an endurance runner. I was recapping TV shows. I was just finally putting myself out there more, because
Right.
in the years after his death, while I was pursuing a career in magazines, which was what I had moved to New York City to do the summer he died, I wasn't going at it fully. Like, I was too timid. I was a copy editor, which is really important. Everyone needs their mistakes fixed. But I always
Sure.
looked at it as I was kind of standing on the sidelines as opposed to being center stage like he was, because he was so like larger than life and a performer and creative. And I know a lot of my creative gifts come from him.
You
So
must have learned things about your dad too through his friends and other people that you didn't know about him, or stories you hadn't heard yet that must have meant a lot.
Well, you know what's cool is doing something like this, doing something so positive and so uplifting and exciting to people. It just really brings people out. It makes them
Yeah.
offer to help. It makes them want to be part of it. And that was such a completely different experience than what I had at 25, which was, this was scary for everyone. So it was like,
Right.
how could we talk about it? And it was somewhat isolating for me, because as a 25-year-old, you don't know to ask for help, you know?
Right.
So I just went through it with my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time. He was my main support. And I didn't feel like, you know, there was just a lot of alienation. So once I was able to take these steps, which happened right after I got married, And I feel like that's related because it always felt to me almost like I had made this major commitment to that. So now I was ready for this.
An important man left your life and an important man entered your life.
And they met one time. They met 5 days before he died. So
Well, that's a gift in
yeah.
itself. I mean, you at least have that knowledge that your dad met your husband, and some people don't get that. So I'm glad you had that.
And it's interesting you mentioned that too, because my husband has always said, by my doing the list and living out my dad's dreams, he does feel like he knows him now.
Yeah, it's very special when you hear stories about your parent, and I'm always telling people this. I had a friend who passed in her 40s of a brain tumor, and I told people that were friends of ours, and we all went to high school together. So I said the best thing you can do for her sons is send them pictures or tell them stories that they didn't know about her. You fill in the blanks that they didn't have filled in. That means more to them than anything else, any I'm sorry you can give them.
Yeah, and with my dad's list, he wrote this when he was 29, and I listened on one of your episodes. You were talking about how sometimes when loved ones appear in spirit, they just choose their age, and I think he probably would have chosen that age. It was the year that I was born. It's like I almost feel like I'm karmically attached to the list. So he was still in a place in his life where he was so hopeful and optimistic.
Yeah, often, I mean, that would be a year he'd go back to. They say life began, and they'll say in a reading, I'm 22 now, or I'm 31 now, whatever it is, and it ends up that they either got married or had a child in that year. So that's when their life truly began. So when you look at those pictures of your dad at 29, you can rest assured that you would be part of his heaven.
Oh, that's really sweet. Yeah, and the other thing that started happening, I never thought I had any kind of, certainly not like you, any kind of mediumship abilities. The closest I came for years was I would hear a song that he would sing, and he was a singer, so he sang songs all the time. Lots of songs to choose from.
So he'll connect to you through music, because like my dad was a professional ballroom dancer, so music is something that he uses as signs, and that would be a huge sign from your dad in the most random places.
Yeah, exactly. And then it started being the number 88. August 8th was the day he died. I became sort of fixated on that day. But then I learned that 88 means abundance in some places, so I sort of switched it, like I flipped it a little bit to try to think about it differently. But the day that my brother gave me this bucket list, which neither of us knew about, I suddenly saw my dad's face in the back of my mind, and he was smiling and nodding.
Oh, I love that.
And it was like, whoa. Like, I couldn't have made that up,
No. And, 8 is the number of life in numerology, so 8 is life. So the fact that he died on 8/8 is almost as if he's saying, I'm still here. I'm still alive. It's life.
Yeah.
So you were asking about when people are young, what the difference is. And I referenced trauma being it, but it's a hard age to learn the lesson that people don't know what to say to those who are grieving. Mm-hmm. So they tend to disappear out of your life, and you really learn who your friends and your family are, and who your dad mattered to. I remember the people that weren't bothered to come, to a funeral, or, and they had their excuses. Oh, I wasn't feeling well. It's like, yeah, he wasn't either. So, you could come to the funeral and sit in the back. I mean, do something, but it really makes you look at things differently, because then you think, well, what if I died? Yeah. Would this be their response? It's not convenient to show up to pay their respects. So, and then the friends that you have drop out of your life, you see them for who they are, because you're no longer their good time gal. All of a sudden you're this ball of grief that they're like, oh, you're a downer. It's like, okay, well, it shows you variations of energy and what you don't want to be, and also who you desire to become as far as better than that. You want to be somebody deeper than that.
Yeah, I mean, in that way, it was a little bit of a gift for me, though, right? Because now I'm the person who, when a friend's loved one dies, I send them the C.S. Lewis book, You
understand.
I go to the funeral if I can. Most of the time I can.
Right.
if someone is sick, I want to go to the chemotherapy. Like I want to be there. I want to show up because that stuff matters.
Right. I just got back from a celebration of life that we flew to LA for yesterday for my friend Jen's mom. And I had said to my husband, I said, it's not that we know each other. We got to know each other really well during COVID because we met on a television show that we were both on together. And we just got kind of close talking about, parents passing in that 3-year period when her mom was sick. So I go to this celebration of life, and I went because I wanted her to know that when it matters, I'll show up. Because all the other times you show up don't ever matter as much as the dark times.
Yeah.
Those times. And she said, I can't believe you came, this far for me. And it's like, of course they came this far for you. And then Carole King got up and sang, and I'm like, okay, this isn't like other funerals. So that was pretty amazing. But it was a remembrance of life and how we want to be remembered. And it was a very beautiful thing. But I went because I really wanted her to know that she mattered to me. And that's what funerals really are. I mean, weddings, funerals, the important days in somebody's life. And if you're lucky, everywhere in between too. But I also tell people they always show up to their celebrations. They don't like their funerals being dark. They want it to be a joyous and full of lifetime.
My dad was that way too. I think that's who I learned it from. I've heard stories. You mentioned, have you heard stories from his friends? I've heard stories from family members, cousins who remember being 4 years old and their father just passed away, who was my dad's brother. Very suddenly. And my dad was on the trampoline playing with them, with her and her sister the whole day. And then her older brother, who was a teenager, said, I remember when he showed up at the airport and shook my hand and he kept me laughing for the whole funeral. And it's like, this was a time when his brother had just had a stroke and died at age 38. And he's still doing this for everybody else.
Right.
And that's just who he was.
It sounds like you're here to learn something about life and death because your life is peppered with young passings. Have you ever thought of helping other people go through their bucket lists and maybe plan their own adventures in getting to know the person that they lost? I think that's an incredibly important thing in a person's life, to know their parents.
I'm working on something like that now. I hooked up with a woman named Stacey Lauren who runs the Do the Thing podcast, and in July every week we're gonna do a series on Facebook where we help people start their own bucket list, but actually do them. Because the thing about my dad's list, in 1978 nobody called it a bucket list yet. It actually was more like his life goals.
Wasn't until the Jack Nicholson movie, The Bucket List, came out that everybody knew it. Yeah, sure.
He's 29. He wasn't thinking, despite his premonition as a young man, he wasn't thinking about dying when he wrote this list. Right. And that's what I'm in favor of, is actually writing down what you want to do with your life. And, strangely enough, a couple years before we found the list, I had written down a list of my values. Because I was working at Good Housekeeping, and there was some article about how it helped women lose weight when they did that or something.
Right.
I was about to get married. I'm like, I need to lose a few pounds. I'll try this. And it's like, they said, sit down for 15 minutes and write all your values. And like the women who wrote them down lost the weight. So that's what I did. But it turned out to be a really helpful practice, because I think the idea was, when you are an emotional eater, it's because you feel empty. So if you can look at the things that fill you up, then you stop doing that. But now I think it's set the wheels in motion for me to embrace my life and be more intentional about it.
You documented your dad's spirit in a book.
Yeah.
So that people could know him. And I think that's an amazing tribute. So I know that would make him very happy. Can you tell us about some of your favorite bucket list items of his?
Yeah, skydiving was amazing.
That's so funny, because I wrote down the question, the next one is, were there any you didn't want to do or that scared you? For instance, I know that jumping out of a plane would cause me pause. That was my example, so that's pretty funny.
Well, the thing about skydiving is it's similar to the values list I was just talking about. It really makes you look at your life, because it's like, am I good if I go right now?
Right.
Like, am I okay with how I've lived? You have to kind of regroup a little bit, and I decided I was okay with it. And that's a cool feeling, because I think if you get to that point where you're like, I don't have any shame or regrets, then it's only forward from there. And I did survive it, and it really affected my faith too, because, you know, God let me survive.
I've heard that about skydiving, and I'm going to believe all of you who say that, because if I die without skydiving, I'm okay with that. No regrets. But that's on a lot of people's bucket list.
But yeah, items like that, items like surfing in the Pacific, items like go sailing by myself, even go to Vienna. I went to Vienna by myself for 2 weeks, which I, you know, of course I
Wow.
wasn't by myself. My dad was there with me.
Right.
Um,
Right.
each
Did
of,
you bring his picture with you?
I didn't have a physical one, but I'm sure I had them on my phone. Like
If
he
next
kept,
time,
I kept imagining he was right there, like in restaurants, sitting across from me. Like there
right.
were empty chairs all the time. Even when I went to a concert, I went to like a quartet of violins in a
Beautiful.
beautiful cathedral.
Yeah.
And I thought it was funny because I had this silver water bottle and I dropped it twice. It was a very like Michael Scott on The Office moment because it's like everyone heard it, and
You're like,
my
that
dad would
wasn't me.
find
That
that
was the
very
guy
funny.
next to me.
Yeah,
That
my dad
wasn't
would find
me.
that so funny because most of the time when he shows up, it's funny because that was our relationship, him
He
making fun
probably
of me.
knocked it over out of your hand.
It
Just
was
to,
on the ground. He probably did. But then at the end of the concert, you know, beyond like the one empty seat and the bottle falling over twice, by the way, it happened twice. The leader of the
so,
quartet said, "Okay," in his like broken German, you know, or it's broken English because he's German. We're
right.
going to end not with Beethoven, but with a man from Ireland, which my dad's Irish, so it was like, okay,
Mm.
you know. But you know, beyond how amazing and incredible it was just to be brave enough to take a solo trip like that, it was always like the thrill seeking, death defying ones that I have to say are my favorites because
Yeah.
I was so traumatized
Yeah.
without realizing it, even about getting behind the wheel of a car, and just protecting myself and very focused for many years on I have to protect my loved ones. I have to look,
Hmm.
and COVID really affected that for me.
Sure.
I got to let them make their own decisions, you know,
Right.
and I think that's normal that people get like that. But forcing myself to have this fear exposure 54 times, it was very healing for me.
So I find, and I want to know what your thoughts are on this, but do you find even the smallest bucket list item can really carry a big impact in your life?
Yeah. I mean, grow a watermelon, you know.
Okay, that's a cool one.
Yeah. I mean, all of them mattered. Whenever someone asks me my favorites, you know, my brother helped me with type 40 words a minute correctly, which I thought
Ah,
was really hilarious because he shares my dad's humor. And it's like, you know, he did it before I did, of course. He was faster than me. Like,
right.
that's natural that that would happen. And what else? Some of them seem small, but they're really not. Like, help Laura win a scholarship, which I viewed as the severance I got when I lost my job, because now it's
Hmm.
freeing me up to study things.
Right.
Make my spouse feel happy, healthy, handsome, and young every day of their life. I mean, it was for my mom, so it was pretty, but that's kind of an ongoing one. I feel like I'm going to be working on that one forever.
Do you send your mom flowers from him every year? Or do
Oh
something
yeah,
along those
yeah.
lines?
Well, it's so weird that you say that because he always sent her flowers on
Is it?
Valentine's Day. No,
That's
it's not
awesome.
weird because it's
So,
you. But yeah, he always sent her flowers on Valentine's Day, and he gave me one carnation every Valentine's
oh,
Day. And the Valentine's Day where I actually found out that I got the book deal, it
hmm.
was the day before, and I was saying to my husband, "Oh, I'm really missing him this time," because I was really grief stricken because it was reminding me how he's not here in human form to talk about
Right.
this.
Right.
And then the next day, I got an email from his friend, and she said, "Oh, I was cleaning my house, and I just found a poem he wrote."
Oh,
And it was,
dates can be important. They communicate through those dates. And so cuz we get that. We know what they're saying. You know your dad was saying I'm helping you.
oh,
Like I'm
absolutely.
doing this on this day so that you know it's me.
Oh, yeah.
So
But through other
so I
people, you know, through other
right.
people that I didn't even know.
Well, they often have to work through other people to get to you because we often become blocked by pain. We can see signs, but when your heart's broken, even if it's been 20 years since somebody passed, people have this wall of protection that goes up inside of us because we can't take one more loss like that. It just destroys you. And part of you still thinks they're going to walk through the door, that there's no way this person could have been destroyed. There's no way they're not in the physical world. So especially with parents who lose children, I see this a lot, but it makes it difficult to communicate through us directly. It took my dad 4 years to come through to me. I had to have another medium bring him through, and I had to bring her dad through because we were both blocked. So it's not unusual. It's actually very common. So for you, if you're more of a practical thinker, especially in energy, it can be more difficult for them because you'll process things through your head first before you process it in your center.
Well, that's exactly what the mission was like for me. I had to start being heart focused, and he started sending me hearts every day. And that's how I always knew I'm making the right choice, because that's
right.
It's almost like I was built to be head driven, but my purpose is heart driven. So it was always this sort of conflict, and I had to learn to trust this one.
Well, you're finding your balance, which makes you an evolved being. Congratulations. So a lot of people don't find the balance between the mind and their center, their heart, and they get to the end of their life and they're too heavy, cerebral and academic thinker, or they feel too much and they drive themselves crazy and they don't process things in a practical way. So you have to find a balance. So where you're at's really good, and your dad would be, really proud of you. I'm sure everyone's told you that, but this is from me. And he's really proud of you.
Thank you so much.
The book coming out tomorrow today. Well, technically today, the book coming out today, June 13th, is a huge testament to your love for your father. And for people out there that think they don't want to jump out of a plane and the small bucket list items don't matter, I wanted to eat a bowl of Lucky Charms in Ireland because I promised myself that when I was 11, when I was eating Lucky Charms, I was going to go there and have a bowl. So I did that for little Allison and checked it off the list, and I rolled down the hill of clovers. So these things didn't take a lot to do other than a plane trip. And I did find the Lucky Charms. It was the last one available in Dublin, and I ate it before we got on the plane to leave. So even the small things can bring you such joy when it comes to your own bucket list, and for you, your father's. And I know that your father, seemed to have a lot of adventure in him. My list revolves around food and food experiences, like eating chicken wings in Buffalo, New York, where they originated, or a Waldorf salad in the Waldorf Astoria, which I did. So for your dad, did he have a theme energy to his bucket list of what he wanted done? Was it all sort of adventure driven, or what was it?
It was
that
a
made
real
it
mix.
Distinctly him?
Yeah, it was I think it was career goals. Like he had have 5 songs recorded and then make 3 good family friends movies. And, that was right under write and have a few novels published. So it was his creative goals, but then it was also things like, the thing I was discussing about making his wife happy, or my absolute favorite one is, give my kids the most love, the best example, and the best education I can give.
That's a huge one. I mean, that's valuable in your life. And he's still teaching you through his bucket list. So he continues his list, not with just you doing the things that he had written down, but in spirit, he's still doing these things that he wanted for you. So I find that quite spectacular that you can be a part of that.
I mean, I almost feel like even though he kept it a secret that he was checking it off, his energy towards checking it off was affecting the kind of parent he was. So he was almost unconsciously teaching my brother and me things that ended up being helpful.
Was he fearless? I mean, did you find your dad to be a pretty fearless guy?
Yeah. Yeah, you would only have to sit there and talk to him for a few minutes to realize that.
He sounds like a blast.
Yeah, he really pushed the boundaries with jokes for sure.
Was he a fire sign? Was he like a fire sign? Because he sounds super irreverent and adventurous.
We were a week apart, March 30th and April 6th. He always said,
Aries, yeah.
He used to say, you're a natural born leader, to this shy, quiet little, pensive, practical little girl.
Right. Oh, that's so, well, how special that you get to spend your birthday together. And I bring parents through when they do have a birthday near a child. They always say, I want you to celebrate your birthday because I want you to remember it was one of the happiest days of my life. And that day will always be special to me, and I will always be there on that day. So they don't want their birthday to overshadow yours with any sort of grief and smack of sadness. They want you to celebrate your birthday big for both of you, knowing they're there. So I hope that you remember that when your next birthday rolls around, to go big for you and Dad, and that was one of the happiest days of his life.
Yeah, I'm happy you said that because I mentioned earlier how I would focus on that date that he died, the 8/8, all the time. But during the list, the number 54 kept showing up. And that was the number of years he lived. And it was like so weird. At the Rose Bowl, the final score was 54, which was it had never happened before. They went into double overtime for that to happen. And I had prayed for it. At halftime, I was like, please make the score the age you were when you died. I know that's impossible. And then they did it. I went to Super Bowl 54. I rode 54 miles on a bike in the desert. My bike now has the size 54 on it. It's like it just kept showing up. And then when I was at the Super Bowl, and I wrote about this in the book, I noticed in Roman numerals the number 54 is LIV.
Oh, Liv, I like that. That's
and it like finally clicked, you know. Like, what if instead of getting so hung up on this horrible day that he died, I could be focused on how lucky I was that he lived for 54 years, you know, and however many years I got to have with him. And I think gratitude is so important. And you know, when it comes to being intentional with your life and wanting to give to others, it's a lot easier when you find a way to instead of feeling like you were robbed of something, to be appreciative for what you have.
Well, and sometimes the things that didn't work out, when we die, we find out why it didn't work out because it made something else in our life possible, or something else better that we needed more than what we wanted. But we get hung up on what we want, you know, what we desire. So I couldn't agree with you more. Did your father's bucket list inspire you to write your own?
Yeah, of course. I have a couple of them. I have one that is
just...
So
Laura, do you have anything steamy on yours to share with the listeners? Anything like uniquely different? Or did you find that your bucket list mirrored your dad's in style?
I would say this probably is true of our personalities. It's like his, but with like, 10 times the intensity. You know,
well, you had to write a book. Your dad is so larger than life, as you said, and just so incredible and such a teacher. And he won't just teach you. He's going to end up teaching everybody that reads your book and gets to know him through what you write, and he writes through you your book. So I'm sure he helped you to write it. I'm sure you know that. And he'll continue to do these amazing I'm here's throughout your life so that it's irrefutable, so that you know for sure it's him. And my dad did the same thing, and we're very lucky to have unique men to have been our dads, to miss in the physical world, but to embrace in spirit. So I'm glad that you're able to do that. What about your husband? Is he going to make a list? Do you make lists together?
Oh, yeah, he has one.
Couples make lists together?
His is a lot shorter than mine. One of the things I learned doing this list and having my husband be my main helper was how to navigate that better, too. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of it does come from that intention of wanting to help him be happy, healthy, young, his whole life. And we used to do this thing where we went on trips where we would walk through labyrinths together. And we would do this thing where we would ask a question, and then you walk into the labyrinth, and you go all the way to the middle, and then supposedly you get some insight on the question, and then you walk out. And I noticed he was way faster than me, so he would be going along. But then every once in a while we would touch hands. And it occurred to me, like, oh, that's what marriage is. Like, that's what this is like. We're on our own paths, but sometimes we come together. So I feel like that was part of the list, too, in that he has taught me that it's okay to pursue what I need to do. Like, just because we got married doesn't mean I need to be, like, just this subordinate person. Yeah, I'm an Aries.
Independent Aries.
He's a Virgo.
Oh, if he's a Virgo, your husband?
Yeah.
He'll always be there. He'll never divorce you. I know. He's going to let you do you and do what you want. It's just funny thinking of a Virgo trekking around in labyrinths and mountains and probably loves hiking and things of that nature because it's such an earth sign thing to do.
He does.
For you and your dad, I'm surprised, and I'd be curious to know, did he have race cars on his list of things to do?
Just
because that's a very Aries thing
drive
to
a
do.
Corvette. Drive a Corvette.
Okay, there it is. There it is. So they have classes you can take. I took race car driving school at Bondurant's out here, and I drove like 3 or 4 different really fast cars on racetracks, and I cut the corners in places you're not supposed to, but I didn't care because I had a helmet, and I'm like, I'm doing it anyway. I'm a Mars and Aries. I act and react with aggression, so I get it. But that might be something fun on your list. It's thrilling. Just a suggestion.
Oh, for my own list, you mean? Okay, yeah. I mean, I did take a class from race car drivers. It was interesting though because it was for safety. And they were like experts on it. And that's the thing I always find fascinating, right? Is that these guys and women too, of course, who drive race cars, they really care about the cars. They're not going to do anything to hurt them. And that was true of the Corvette owner who let me have a thrill ride while he sat right next to me explaining every single safety feature of the vehicle.
Right.
I mean, that was an expensive car, you know.
Yeah. Well, I think the schools often they're highly insured for the cars because many people race them. And so they did go through the safety, but briefly, and they're like, go have fun. It's like, I'm going to go have fun. And we just did, and they had them there for us when you came around. But the guy they put in the car with me wanted to get out like halfway through the race. And I was just so amused because he talked about what a pro he was and how he does this all the time. And, you know, we both had paid for this course, and he looked kind of green. I'm like, you want me to let you out? Because I know I drive kind of fast. So that was fun. That was on my list. So I think it's good that you got to get some of that Aries out of your system. So your dad's bucket list definitely changed the way you live your life. You probably make sure that something you say no to, something you won't regret. And the people you have in your life, you don't have time for people that are kind of a waste of space or aren't really there for you. And I would imagine that would be something he would want to teach you as well, not to waste your precious time with people who don't deserve your time. I think a lot of people need to read your book. They need to read all of the stories from your dad and you and what you've been through and the bonding that happened through the writing of the book, but that already existed through your father-daughter relationship and love. And I think by reading your book, it'll inspire other people to write their own lists and maybe to live their lives a little differently as though tomorrow wasn't guaranteed, and to live in the now. People are way too worried, focused on down the road, and I'm getting older, and it's like everybody gets older. So 20-year-olds that are, you know, perfectly hatched, that their skin's perfect, won't be one day if they're lucky enough to live long enough to get a wrinkle. You know, I mean, we're fortunate to be able to age, you know, and we'd rather be, you know, 80-year-old us than 20-year-old other people, and just make it about your life and stop worrying about what everybody else is doing. So I think bucket lists are a big part of that. Be independent, be an individual, and live life large.
Yeah, and I mean, two pieces of advice I'd give your listeners. I think that's incredible what you just said. And I would say people have misconceptions about a bucket list. And one is they think it's going to make them more selfish, when really it's just because it's like, oh, I'm just doing what I want to do. I should be here for everybody else. But really it made me better at being there for everybody else because I was filling my own well. What'd you say?
It's so not selfish.
Yeah.
It's so not selfish. It's just so interesting to see people's perspective that they would be like, oh, that's selfish of me. It's like, what, are you supposed to live your life for everybody else and be an energy drain? And then at the end of your life, there's nothing because your soul never evolved because you lived for people who didn't even appreciate it most of the time, or that maybe didn't value your time as much as it was worth. I mean, being selfish isn't something we should ascribe to ourselves when it comes to doing things that bring us joy or some sort of intellectual growth or spiritual growth. That's when you should make it about yourself, and it's okay to do that. We're not saying don't feed your children.
No, no. Well, and and the other thing I'd say is, the way I had to organize this, since I did it over 6 years, initially I wanted to do four, was I had to start saying no to things sometimes. As a woman, that's a little bit harder. I had to just prioritize my time better, and make choices instead of just saying,
Right.
sure, I'll be there. Okay, okay, okay. And that is something that really helps you get in touch with the real you and what you actually want. And I think people struggle with that a lot. The other thing
I think COVID helped that too. I
I
think it
think
made
so.
people look at their time a little closer. I'm sorry, go
Yeah. Oh, no, it's
ahead.
okay. The other thing I'd say is you're going to get help. That's the other misconception I think people have about writing down what you want to do. You're not
Hmm.
going to be alone. My dad didn't tell anybody about his, and I think maybe that's partly why he only checked off 5 of the items. I think if he told more people, he might have had people happy to go on these
That's smart.
adventures with him.
Yeah.
And I've
Tell
had
people.
54 people, and beyond the people, God, like I realized nature and the universe and God, and there's something going on here that's making this bigger than me. That is supporting me, and that's true. I mean, just like in The Alchemist, they say when you go after your heart's desire, all the universe supports you. So I think that's true anyway.
Yeah, I think so too. And being able to share it with other people, having something that's so important to you on a soul level breathes inspiration into other people. And I do find that they do want to help you when you say, oh, it's on my bucket list. We went to a concert. I wanted to hear Killing Me Softly by Roberta Flack. It was the one song she did not sing that night, but I hung out with her backup singer afterwards. I know my life's weird. And so we were having a cocktail, and I ended up getting an invite a couple days later to go to Palm Springs to hear her. She was going to sing it at her event there for me. And I guess I should be happy just knowing that she would do that. But I didn't get to go. I had a friend pass.
Oh, I'm
But
sorry.
so, obviously that's okay. So I had to be more in that lane, but it was just knowing that somebody cared. So here's where somebody is a really famous singer would be willing to do something like that to help me with a bucket list item. So people really do want to help you. And I've had fans meet me and say that I was on their bucket list. And that means a lot to me. That's a big deal. I hope people get the value in what a bucket list isn't just some silly notion and, I'm just going to go do these things to see if I can. This is a soul level guide of where your soul wants to go and what it wants to experience. And if I want to eat chicken wings in Buffalo, New York, I will eat chicken wings in Buffalo, New York, and people will help you. So I think it's fantastic. I'm excited about your book, and I hope my listeners, I know because they're so soulful. My listeners are the best. They're going to get your book. They're going to read it. They're going to follow some of the items that your dad has, and I'm sure add some of my own. What do you want my listeners to know about your dad?
Oh gosh. I think one of the greatest lessons for me from doing his list, and you have touched on this already a bit, is that I think we have this idea that when someone dies, they're gone. And I think this is something that applies to everyone.
Yeah.
In my experience, the more I was able, particularly with writing the book, because there are some painful, traumatic scenes in that book, but the more I was able to go back and make myself relive them to describe them, the more I was able to let them go and incorporate them into a larger story. So I was no longer this person who had one life and then a tragedy and then a different life. And I think when it
Right.
comes to traumatic death in particular, that tends to really hinder people because
Yeah.
it's too scary. You have to get over the fear part before you can get to the grief. So I faced the fear, got through the
Yeah.
grief, and now all of this connection is happening. It's like the more I did that, the more signs came through. The more I would hear like Field of Dreams style full sentences from him. Like when he does
Yeah.
things, it's so obvious because it's so funny. Whatever, it's something ridiculous that happens. It's so clear that it's him. So I don't even, yeah, when people say things like, oh, that's unfortunate, or you lost him, I don't even agree with that anymore. I don't think he's
Right.
gone. And who's to say what's unfortunate?
Right. And everybody's a different combination, a different variation of energies. Some people won't get it. They're just they're new, they've never been here before. Their soul's like, what? I don't know. It's what I see. And then there's people who feel it on a soul level and they know it to be true. And that means you've been here before, you're a little more evolved, you're harder to shock in life. and car accidents is one of the big traumas in readings that I do because they feel so ripped from you. And you see people survive car accidents where it looks like a tin can that was crushed. And then you think, how did he die in that car accident when so many other people survive it? And so, you go through that stage of grief of, not understanding that. So I went through that with my dad. My dad, I predicted his heart attack. I said 67 of a massive heart attack, and I couldn't prevent it, sent him to all the heart specialists. So I like to tell people this because I knew he was going to die at 67. He heard me. He went to the the cardiologists and the specialists, and they said his heart was fine. And after he died at 67, he never had heart problems before, mind you. He's a professional ballroom dancer, just one widowmaker. And then the medical examiner said there were clear signs of heart disease. So the cardiologists apparently weren't supposed to see what was going on in him because my dad, like yours, is teaching people through my writing.
Right.
So sometimes people die in our life so that we immortalize them in print so that other people can learn. And it is hard I'm sure for you to have gotten into cars after that. You worry about your husband in every movie you see. You play yourself in that scene. What if that happened? But to you, it really happened with your dad. And so, I feel for you. And I know how it feels to lose somebody suddenly that nobody thought was going to pass.
Thank you.
Everybody's like, you're crazy.
No,
I'm like, I hope I'm crazy. I want him to stay.
I can relate to that. I'm sorry that you experienced that.
That's okay.
I can relate to it because I knew a week before my dad died. I was riding. We had just met. Stephen had met him for the first time. We were riding back on a bus to New York, and I was looking at a billboard, and it was one of those things where I was just looking but not really looking. Like my gaze was, foggy.
Staring through it, yeah.
Something appeared to me instead of what the billboard said, which was, I'm not going to see him again.
Wow.
And I knew he had
a feeling of dread, like an overwhelming feeling of not seeing him again.
Yeah, and I had a feeling of dread a month before that too, which I couldn't place what it was, but I knew something big was going to happen. And I told my husband, I'm not going to see him again when we go back at Thanksgiving. And he's like, no, he's fine. You're just, because he had an enlarged heart and he was supposed to get surgery that he was putting off. He's like, oh, you're just worried about his heart. But I mean, now I think that enlarged heart probably made it stop quickly on impact. Right. I mean, that's what they said. And
most likely, yeah.
As far as, sorry, go ahead.
The irony of that, your dad had heart issues and goes in a car accident. My dad had no heart issues that could be detected and dies of a heart attack. You just don't know, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
But I will say this. I think one thing that compounds that fear of someone dying violently like that is you don't want to talk about it. And you just kind of repress it. And then it just gets scarier and scarier. It took me 10 years. And then I wrote about it in the biggest venue possible, the Washington Post.
Good for you.
Yeah, but it was like I was writing about getting married and the sense I had that he wasn't there. Of course, now I don't feel that way at all. But at the time, I was afraid of that. And because I shared it so publicly, someone wrote to me and said, I was in a terrible car crash. And she described all of her horrible injuries, which were almost took her life. And she said, I felt nothing. She said, I just want you to know that I didn't feel any pain. And there's a very good chance that happened to your father, too. So, I mean, what a blessing that this stranger came and told me that. And that helped me to believe that maybe his soul had just sort of jumped out as soon as he saw it.
Yeah, they often will say it's like having your breath stolen and then they're gone. It's just like a very fast, I hear that all the time with people I bring through. So I couldn't agree with her more. And your dad, souls make certain soul contracts with themselves. I could see them saying, you can live a long life, but you're going to have this bad heart. You have to be on all these pills and, have all these wires inside of you or you can go in a car accident, and make this grand exit.
And change the world.
Right, and change the world. And he's like, I'll take the car accident.
He totally would.
You know, it would hurt, and it would hurt less. The car accident hurt less than recovering from surgery and that whole lifetime of other things going wrong. So he may have just said, my number's up. I'm going to go out the way I go out, which is as an adventure. I'm going to go out in a car. It's like, you know, jumping out of a plane or, you know, riding on a train. Like, he probably loved fast things, and he was in a car. So I see guys that are adventurers often go out in cars by choice in that sense, in the soul sense.
Yeah, and I mean, it helped me heal a lot of my baggage around him too, the way that it happened, because my experience of him growing up was only in a car, really. He came to pick us up twice a week as a divorced dad, and this was a teenager who was on a phone, and that was what crashed into him. And so then I had to get over I felt almost humiliated by it. Like, oh God, I was a teenager, and this is my dad who's like a superhero, and that's how he was taken out. You know, like there's no consequences really.
Can I just say to people out there, stop talking on your phone while you're driving. It's not worth another person's life. It aggravates me so much when I see people talking and they've got a passenger. It's like, let your passenger do whatever needs to be done on the phone. You can't talk on the phone and drive. And they pass laws that they don't seem to enforce. It's infuriating. So, you know, the fact that it was a teenager, she's going to go on with her life, you know, and that's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to be the person left behind where you're like, I don't have my dad.
Well, I think it's hard to be that person too, who made that mistake.
Sometimes, most of the time it is if they have a conscience, but I've been people that get on pills or, you know, do things to mentally check out. I've seen the other side as well. Hopefully she learns something from this and shares it with people and becomes a more sort of responsible person in life in his name, because that's a lot to take out of this world, is just a light like your dad who was just minding his own business.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other thing too, though, that I've come to realize is, you know, the more I got into doing his list, the less I was using my phone, because I was just so preoccupied by this amazing thing I was doing. And then it started hitting me like, oh, that's why we're on our phones all the time, because it's just a fun distraction and we let it take over, as opposed to taking the initiative and writing a list and actually enjoying your life. So I thought, well, God, if I just share this story about what it is to enjoy your life and do things you genuinely are passionate about, that will help solve the problem anyway.
That will help. You know, technology with the younger generations, they're missing out because they just sit and scroll through pictures of other people living. It's like, go out there and live, talk to the person next to you, put your phone down. Instagram's not that important. You know, it's not going to be what takes care of you through life. It's supposed to be not something that you're on 9 hours a day. It's just supposed to be something you check in with your friends.
Well, yeah, and it's a big part of what's happening with teenage girls right now too, right? They're playing the comparison game, and it's like, you know, what did Mark Twain say? Every genius is a crackpot until his idea succeeds.
Right. Gotta love Mark Twain.
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing something you genuinely like are passionate about and it's right for you and you're on the right path, everyone's going to tell you you're crazy, just how it is. But you're going to stop comparing yourself. You're going to stop caring about that. And that's
get comfortable in your skin. Yeah, definitely. I agree. So where can my listeners find more about you and your book?
You can go to bylarcarney.com to buy it or pre-order it. My dad would really enjoy how I enunciated my last name. And as of June 13th, today, it's actually out in bookstores. So you can go to Barnes & Noble, you can go indie bookshops. I'm going to small bookstores all over the country this summer to talk about it too.
Great. Oh, I love. Okay, good. You're going to love the fans that come out for your book, the people that you inspire, and they'll have their own stories. That's the beauty of people who appreciate your artistry and your work.
Do you have any advice for that?
Well, I like to have a security person there just in case, because sometimes people get a little too close. Joe used to say to them, "You can take a picture with Allison, don't molest my wife." So, a disclaimer with humor goes a long way. Sign with Sharpies, they're indelible, so the ballpoint fades eventually. You want to leave your mark, and just enjoy it in the moment. Enjoy each of the people, and don't feel bad if you have to move somebody along. There are a lot of people out there that, they're a little lonely and they want to talk at length. You got to keep your line moving. So do you have it on, you have a website dedicated to it, or is this, we're going to put that up.
Yeah, by
put
lauracarney.com. And then my Instagram's my father's list, and my Twitter is LAC30.
Okay, so everybody go check out all of those so you can connect with Laura and her dad. And his name is it Mick?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Mick. And my dad's Mike.
Oh.
Love it. So many overlappings. Very cool. So, okay, so that's where they can find you. And it comes out June 13th, so go get my father's list. Laura, thank you for sharing your journey with us today. Good luck with your book signings. Eat something before you go out.
I will.
There's something bland and light like a PB&J. You'll be golden. And so thank you for sharing your journey with us today. If you ever want to come back, we'd love to have you and talk more about this subject and maybe your experience with your signings and the people. And you're going to realize how many people's lives that your dad's passing, I'd rather say the magic of him, and you will change. You will touch so many people and help them to live more full lives. So thank you for writing your book. And thank you to my listeners. Tune in next Tuesday for a fresh episode of The Dead Life. Before my sign off, happy birthday to our daughter Aurora. June 13th is her birthday. And happy birthday to my husband Joe. June 14th is his. I literally gave him a human being for his birthday. You're welcome.
It's my Uncle Howard's birthday, too.
Happy birthday, Uncle Howard. How's that? Okay. So to all of my believers out there, don't stop believing. That was great.